started your interest in history, storytelling, and writing? Mrs. Nichols, let's start with you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I wish to say thank you so much to Ms. Bonnie Newman Davis for affording this privilege to be here with the company of such elite ladies who have contributed so much to the community and the larger community, and thank those of you for coming to be here. My experience started, I guess, as a child, growing up in multi-generational homes of that of my maternal grandparents in the Western community, where my grandmother lived with me. There was not a doctor on call. He came a month later. And filed my birth certificate. And then also living in the home of my paternal grandparents in Quackson on Ridge Road. I grew up around families and heard so many stories. Had so many experiences at family gatherings, and that really was one of the prime reasons why I decided really to get into family research. Then there was a book called Forget Me Nots, and in this book was a story about my great-great-grandfather, who at that time I didn't know was such a person. Who was enslaved on a plantation and brought down here, of course, with other enslaved persons. I became intrigued with that, and then I began to, in my free time, with 4 children, 1 husband, and a teaching career, and 3 church choirs. I must have been out of my mind. I just didn't realize it at the time. However, I began to go to family reunions and became more intrigued and excited about the fact that, look at, my family has a history. And that's how I became interested in the research and family.
I am a native of Richmond, but our parents were born in Norfolk, and our grandparents were born in come from North Carolina. They did, I should say. So my parents always infused in us these wonderful stories growing up. On my mom's side, they came from Bertie County, so, it was home to not only blacks and whites were related, but the Tuscarora Indians. And so my great-grandmother came up here and was really a medicine woman. People would come to her house to get whatever she put together. So those were interesting stories. And then my father was really a family historian, I believe, when we look back, because he used to talk about his great-grandmother. I think she still is the lady by which we measure all of the other ladies, but that's another story too. So my father, when we went down to North Carolina, would take me to the elders, and he would ask them questions about slavery, so I got indoctrinated early, if you will. And that's always been a fascinating thing for me, studying enslavement, Civil War, and that kind of thing. So even though I started out, I did my first family tree when Roots came out. And a great uncle came up, I'll never forget it. And I thought if I asked him the right questions, I could get to Africa before nightfall. And I found it doesn't work. But I said, but Uncle Paul, did anyone talk about slavery? He said, yes. He said, my grandmother said that her grandmother showed her the whipping marks on her back when her daughter got off easy because she was the master's daughter. Well, that brought Roots to life for me. And I did my first little family tree back then, before I was grown, of course. And so it started there. They didn't wait for teachers to talk to us about Black history. They, introduced us to those stories, and that really sparked the desire right there, I think. My father also drilled in us the special story of the R.R. Moten. Most of you are probably familiar with Barbara Johns, where my father graduated from A&T, and his first teaching job was at R.R. Moten in April of 1951. So he was Barbara Johns' homeroom teacher and algebra teacher, and he actually caught them making the placards or the posters in the back of the class. So I have rare artifacts in regards to that. He kept virtually everything, even his contract that showed He was paid a whopping $11.11 a day.
Jeez.
He taught in those tar paper shacks. So when we talk about Moulton Barbara Johns, it's personal to me. And I won't bore you with a whole bunch because I know we'll all get our turns again. But it started with my parents, you see, and taking us, and so to this day, sitting at the feet of the elders is one of my greatest passions. Thank you for indulging me.
My grandfather was born in 1892. So if I had simply asked him about my grandparents who were probably born into slavery, I would have found out. But it didn't matter to me until after he was gone that I had not asked him those stories. I was too busy living in my own world of books, and I just didn't do those things. And as I was looking through your book, what I found, I was telling Bonnie, I don't like looking at all of those pictures because I realized what the Black community has lost over the years. We've lost that sense of community. And I was telling her, I grew up in Mississippi, a small town in Mississippi, and all pre-segregated civil rights, we all lived in the Black community on our side of town. We were self-contained. And we had one street with all the restaurants, all the new joints, the bars and whatever. And so I remember it was like in Chicago they have what they call the stroll, where people used to walk up and down and promenade in their Easter outfits and Christmas. And we used to do that on Orange Street. But I was a little girl, and I told Bonnie I could not wait to grow up so I could go to the juke joints and drink liquor. And then by the time I was grown, Orange Street was dead. So we have lost so much. And all of you ladies are reminding us of that, keeping that history alive for us. And why do you think that your work is particularly important to keeping that story alive?
Okay, as I listened to the other ladies talk about their grandparents and stories that they were told, it brings to me the fact that I had grandparents that were very relevant and were, my grandfather was one of the first Episcopal priests in the United States, and Black Episcopal priest. And he went through a lot of racism during his time. He would tell me about it, and but there was nothing written. And I am right now trying to trace the things that happened. But I do know that he had a parish that had a hole in the roof, and the rain was coming in on his parishioners, and he asked the bishop to get money for it, like he was giving to the other white churches, and they denied him, and he got very upset about it. And I think he was ostracized back in during that time for asking for that. In other words, he shouldn't have. So it started back then. This kind of thing that's inside of me, and my grandmother, who was said to be Cherokee and Irish, and they were both orphans. They both had college degrees. My grandmother finished Oberlin University, and my grandfather finished Oberlin. They met there. So I've heard the story that they might have been a part of that freedom train, or that train that went through. I've been wanting to research that. But the thing about it is nobody wrote anything down. And I didn't ask enough questions, and that's what's so important. I can't tell you today what my grandfather and my father's side, what he liked and what he didn't like. I never met my father's mother. He never talked about his mother. And I really kicked myself not asking him questions. Why didn't you tell me about your mother? And so they were right there in Tappahannock, Virginia. So all these are things I'm researching right now. I haven't done my autobiography. It's not out yet, let's say. I've been writing on it for 10 years. So I figure this is my year. I'm 77. And I think it's about time for my book to come out. And the thing is, I have a children's book that's been written about me that just got launched from Amazon. It's called Sit In, Stand Out with Elizabeth Johnson Writes. It's a children's book about my experience with the Richmond 34 here in Richmond. And it tells a beautiful story with the pictures and the narration. It was written by a cousin who just asked me, said, Cousin Elizabeth, could I write a book about you? And I just said, sure. Never thinking she would take it any further. And she calls me up about a couple months ago and says, Cousin Elizabeth, the book is ready. I said, what book? She said, the book I told you I was going to write about you. And she sent me, said, I want to know if it's okay if I can get it to be published. And so she sent me the draft, and I really broke down in tears because to think that my word and what I was doing meant enough to her to write about it. And here she is, she's got her book out about what I did, and I'm still writing mine.
You have more to say.
Yeah, I have a lot to say.
I think when we really think and reflect on it, the Richmond and Henrico community are quite a bit intertwined. It does not always become apparent, but when you sit and think about it and reflect on it, because many of us are products of the born into segregation, it brings to mind the sense of community that we did have coming out of enslavement. My book from 1863, 1863 is actually to 1963 rather than 1993. But my book chronologed the activities and a sense of community that we were able to put together after enslavement, post-enslavement. And so we forged our own social clubs. We had our little community stores. We had our own little community juke joints. You know, I couldn't go to them, but my mother talked about going to them. And she taught me how to do a dance called the Pig Chicken, and she did those little short names up there, and they were just going dancing. And and living in the home with multi-generational families as I was blessed to grow up in, just gave me so many stories with great uncles and great aunts, and my family would talk quite freely about those experiences from post-enslavement and how the slaves would cook in their house and then take it up to the big house to be served, and then how they learned to set a table, they learned good manners. So for what I could see, they picked and learned the better habits, and they brought into our own communities and taught their children, and their children taught us. And we now still teach our children as best we can good habits and good manners. And of course, the sense of education is important in our community because we have learned that that's one of the ways that we know to learn to get ahead and to become better persons in order to be good products of our community. In 1958, I have to look at my notes because you know as you get older, the mind isn't always what you think it is. But in 1958, my parents filed a legal petition with Warden versus Richmond School Board that would become a landmark. And my late sister, Wanda Irene Dabney, who became Wanda Dabney Sanders, born in 1950, we lived in Westwood. So my parents filed a suit for her to integrate then the West Hampton schools because they bused us downtown to Moore Street School. But West Hampton School was just a block away, within walking distance. But as they filed the suit, it was put off. It was just, the litigation didn't go forth, and it lingered for 7 years. So during that time, my parents built a home up on Ridge Road, which still stands. My great-grandparents' home is a pink stucco house, still stands on Ridge Road, built in 1905, because my great-grandfather came out of enslavement. But he saw the need to have a home for his family. So my parents, upon being given land by my grandparents, built a house up on Ridge Road. So during the 7 years they waited to go to litigation, which they kept putting off, we think it was a tactic not to go forward with the litigation. My parents moved to Ridge Road, so my sister was actually left out of the suit because they moved. Nonetheless, she did go on to Douglas Southall Freeman High School. But during those years when we had that litigation going, it was not a good, happy time for us because there were those persons that didn't want it to go forth. And so we suffered, I guess, somewhat socially because we had people riding by our homes, shouting slogans and comments that were certainly not complimentary to the language that we wanted to hear. And so all of those experiences helped to make us who we were. But the sense of community the community was supportive of the efforts to forge ahead, to teach our children that we were equal to anyone else and everyone else who lived during that time. So it has made me productive to continue to do family research and genealogy and continue to do writings and continue to share with the community what has occurred in the history of African American families.
It's going to be hard to follow.
I
think you asked why is our work important?
Why do you think your work is important?
Personally, I think that my work is important because it bridges the gap between oral histories and the missing pages that we find in textbooks. A lot of our histories can't be found in the textbooks, so you really do have to sit at the feet of the elders to cull their histories, and that has been the most rewarding part of this journey. Like Mrs. Nichols, I published with the Black America series, the Richmond, Virginia installment, back in 2002. So I realized that I was going to have to cull photographs from various repositories and also people. So I called upon Dr. Benjamin Lambert, and it was he who said, you know who you need to talk to? You need to talk to Frankie Foster. Just about every elder said you needed to talk to Dr. Foster. And I know he's not with us now, but he's with us in spirit. He's the greatest chronicler of the African American experience ever was, is, and ever will be. So what I learned from him as one of my mentors is you have to establish a network of people, of elders. He had his network of former teachers. And so that's important. You have to sit at the feet of the elders because so many of these stories aren't on paper. So we are here and blessed to be able to bridge those gaps. And after I did that book, and I've worked on documentaries for others, but I had my own development on Miss Virginia Randolph because what we are told is basically a cursory view of her life, that she was a gene supervising industrial teacher. So I put forth some of our elders, I call them champions, so that we might expand the narrative, if you will. I am blessed to be the author of 8 biographical entries for the African American National Biography. It's a multi-volume set, and it is published by Harvard University and the Oxford University Press. And so I've been blessed to propose people for that and then author the works on them, because I know that it's imperative that we tell those stories from the inside out. And my MO, if you will, is what I call the IEI principle. It's to introduce people to subjects and people, to educate them about them, and then inspire. And that's the IEI. And so that informs all that I do. But and regardless of what I'm doing, I'm still an educator at heart, although I may be talking to nurses about anatomy and phys, or people about their meds, because I'm still a registered pharmacist. But this is my calling is as an educator, so that undergirds all that I do. Let me give you a couple examples of expanding the narrative. as most of you, I'm sure most of you know Mrs. Maggie Walker. She is, touted, and rightfully so, as the first Black woman to found and become president of a bank in America. We know now that, a white lady did eclipse that and did that a little bit earlier than her. But instead of pigeonholing her into Black history, no one's talking about the fact that she's also the first woman of any race to found and become president of a charter bank in Richmond and the Commonwealth of Virginia. So it's not just Black history, as Carter G. Woodson says. These things are the studies of the Black experiences in history. So by going deeper, I'm able to expand the narrative. And it was personal for her because I was a former member of the Maggie Walker Historical Foundation, and as a Richmonder, it was truly a blessing to God to be the researcher that finally verified she was born in 1864 instead of 1867. So when I see that 1864, my heart flutters because even an average Jane like me can change what is in history books going forward. It seems. So Dr. Sarah Jones, she is another lady, Black lady, who I have a big work on, and her also her biographer. She is touted as the first Black lady to pass the boards here in Virginia and become a medical doctor. But in undergoing deeper research, you have to go deep for our research. I work with primary documents, but I've been able to uncover she's the first lady of any race, first female native of Virginia to pass the boards, because the other lady who did it prior to her was from South Carolina. So I don't stop at the cursory stuff. My calling, I try to be dutiful with my calling. That means long hours, but every day just gets sweeter and sweeter. It's just a joy to walk in your calling. And may I mention one thing, since you work with the history of journalism, between 1877 and 1929, we had 10 Black newspapers here. And the first one was the Virginia Star, started by Otway M. Stewart and Peter Woolfolk. They'll be in our phase 2 upstairs. They started that newspaper audience in 1877. And it was, when you look at the extant copies, it's some of the most eloquent writing you will ever see. But we weren't taught those things in school. You see, when Black History Month came around, we learned about the greats, but never about the local greats that serve as sources of inspiration. And lastly, if I might, our works collectively are important because we can expand the narrative collectively. Oftentimes we see put forth pictures of victimization. We hear a lot about enslavement and the slave trade here, but when was the last time you heard a lecture on the free Black experience here? Richmond was second only to Petersburg with the number of free Blacks in 1860, with about 2,600 free Blacks, second to Petersburg. So I conduct lectures on that. Public history, everyone, is at its finest when you merge great storytelling with sound scholarship. And so we are blessed to be able to expand the narrative. And 10 newspapers, we don't hear about those things. And there was a documentary called Soldiers Without Swords.
Right.
I called my lectures Soldiers with Swords because their pens were the swords. And I'll stop at that.
Now, none of you started out as a writer or a historian. So how did you get started? I mean, how did you know you wanted to even write? Did you write in high school? Did you write history? I know as a writer and a historian that it's very difficult to get started. And I think when you all probably got started, things weren't even digitized, were they?
Not like down there.
Yeah. I couldn't even imagine not having to go through newspaper after paper to do the research that I do. So tell me about your work, your efforts to write your stories, some of the most important or the most difficult thing that you had to do to tell your stories.
Okay, we started a genealogy and historical society here, Black Genealogy and Historical Society. So I really got started shortly after I got married to kill some time with tracing the roots again more seriously. And I was a full-time pharmacist then, but that one day a week I would get off every 2 or 3 weeks. I would utilize that and go down to Duke University and UNC Chapel Hill and comb through their special collections. I would drive 300 miles round trip on that one day off, so I knew something was happening there. Okay, but it got so as I was checking those meds, to send out to nursing homes, it became an overwhelming calling, and it was crystal clear to me that I needed to answer that call to tell those lesser known stories, and to do that by way of publications and documentaries. Now, when I turned in that resignation, July 11, 1999, most people will think I was certifiable. You leave in full-time pharmacy, you don't have a degree in history, but it's not about what you don't have, it's what you do have. And the calling, sometimes you might not, only you may hear that calling, but I'm blessed to have God and a very supportive husband who knows, there's no need to stand in the way. He's always the first to hear about every discovery. And I'm blessed to have a wonderfully supportive family. But you have to put in the work, because keep in mind, I didn't have a history degree, but when I opened up some information one day as I sat at the North Carolina Archives, I was looking at an estate division that had the names of over 1,000 enslaved people. And they were being divvied up. And that is the moment, audience, that it became not my genealogy, but the story of all of those Devereaux descendants. And so I would say, yes, I had a backup plan. I've worked part-time since then in that endeavor, in pharmacy, but at that point, probably within 6 or 7 months, I was an associate producer on the American Legacy television special through Tim Reed at New Millennium Studios. And I actually bought several of those books of the Black America series. And I looked and I said, I wonder if anyone's done the Richmond installment. So on a Friday, I emailed them, and by Monday they said, go for it. So I did that in about 6 or 7 months. I've been blessed to work on the documentaries of others, but in the writings, when I find that there's a dearth, I go for that. And so what drives me is that if we don't do it, who can we depend on to do it, you see? I've found that I can't really concentrate on just any one thing, so that I have ongoing projects on early blacks in medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, building, whatever it is, you name it, and specialized tours, because we have to flesh out those stories. And sitting at the feet of the elders is just as important now, because we're losing so many daily as it was in yesterday. Thank you.
Well, I have always been, my first love is really music. I started taking piano when I was 5 years old. And my father and mother moved from Rankin County at the end of World War II to Portland, Maine. When they moved, we migrated from place to find work. And so my mother's brother went up there and sent a shout out, come on up here to Portland, Maine. There are jobs here for African Americans. So during that time, I was a little girl, very little, and we moved there. My father was in the service. My mother worked in the sardine factory. And I started taking piano lessons. Came back, I continued to take piano lessons, living on Ridge Road. And one of my cousins in Ziontown, because we all were related by hook or crook, And so I started taking piano from my cousins, Sadie Carla Sears, who was a teacher at Virginia Randolph. And I continued to take it. I came down to Benjamin Graves, and then I continued to take piano from a Professor Howell, who had a house right down the street there. And he taught a lot of veterans. So I would take piano lessons from him. He could cook greens in the kitchen and tell you in the studio that you're not playing what's on that sheet of paper. I said, wow, did he figure that out? I didn't really practice a lot that week, because with piano, it was a craft that you had to practice in order to show yourself worthy and approved. And I just continued with that with Mrs. Audrey Bradford Robertson, who had her own studio, went on to Virginia State, and so that's where I graduated with degrees in music with several of my classmates from Magna Walker High School, and we all went into the teaching profession. So then I taught in Norfolk County and just went on from there. And I'd always been active in my Western Baptist Church. And then by I don't know what you would call it, I met and married this preacher. And he ended up not having, I think what he really did was, Betty, I think he fired the musician. So he could hire me. That kind of went over my head for the first few months, but then I said, well, did so-and-so quit? Did I miss something here, And he just said, well, he's not here anymore. And so I became, the music director, choir director, or the organist, which I prepared for at Virginia State. But moving on into the 70s, my children had all been born. I was still teaching. But then I became interested in family genealogy through a family reunion at the Pryor family and the Moss family reunions. I gathered all of this information, and my husband said to me, you got all this stuff in a box here, and all this stuff in a box. Why don't you write a book? And I said, there's no time. When would I write a book? And so then he would go on to glory, and I still had my 4 children. Well, my oldest daughter teaches at Norfolk State with this lady right here. So she's the one that told me she was coming today. But my daughter wrote a book on Hampton through the Arcadia series. So then she said, Mom, Daddy kept telling you to write this book. Why don't you do one on Norfolk County? And I just kind of went back and forth with that. And so she said, here, fill out this 10-page application. And so that was part of the history there, to fill out the 10-page application. And so I told them all of my business and sent it in. And I said to her, Colita, this is not going to get approved. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. And sure enough, it came back a week later, and they said, oh, we'd love to do your book. I said, really? So I got busy on the 9 chapters. My sister was helping me because we had grown up together, but they gave me a year to write it. But during that time, my sister died unexpectedly. And so they gave me another 9 months to just have time to regroup from that. So I continued on to the eastern part of Norfolk County to write the book that my husband kept saying he thought I should write. Share the stories, and as Elvatrice Belsches has said, the oral history is just so important for us because there's nothing written for us, as my grandmother used to say, to tell the oral history. And even though all of the facts may not be completely in order, the dates may not be correct, but it gives you enough to have a starting point, to know where to do the research. And so when I started in the 70s going down town to the state library, there was nothing online. There wasn't an online. But I spent hours looking through this microfilm, and I take the glasses off, put them back on, took my magnifying glass, used the magnifying glass down there. Sometimes it was just hard to figure out, what is this that's written? And sometimes I would take my children with me and say, here, get on my machine and read this for me. So I just kind of took them along with me. When my husband couldn't be home or take them to church with him, they went with me. And when my parents were busy and I couldn't take them to Ridge Road to stay with them, they just came on along with me. I gave them a sandwich, a lunch pail, some drink, and they just rode through the countryside, finding out where people lived, where the cemeteries were they were no longer burying in, talking to the elders. Some people were very forthcoming. Others were a little suspicious, but by the time they found out they were going to be in a book, and people still love picture books, even though children, we say, love picture books, but adults love to look at pictures. I know I do. I'll look at the picture first and read the caption later. And so Arcadia said that, well, you have to have so many pictures, so many words. Elvatrice knows the drill. You're going over the words by 200. Reduce them, take them out. And the pictures that you submit have to be approved. So I went forward to do that, but the research at the beginning was very difficult. The oral history was what we had to try to substantiate by then going forth to find dates that would verify that which we had learned from this person saying that and that person saying that. And then in 2010, the 400-year legacy for the county of Henrico was being celebrated during the time that my book came out. And they asked me, even though I wasn't living in the city anymore, but my family was still in Henrico County, to be on that committee because of my book. And that was really during the time that I met Elvatrice Belsches. So we became, friendly and comrades and shared for one another help. And from that committee, they formed the African American Trailblazers. So after the 400-year legacy year ended, then they asked, will some of us continue to write, because they wanted to find out more about African Americans historically in Henrico County that had contributed to the history and to the founding of the African Americans in Henrico County. So Ms. Betty Thornton, who's the wife of Frank Thornton, and Samuel Banks, who was a former educator with the Richmond Public Schools, and I were on this committee. And we really researched, came up with 12 to 20 African American persons through the social media, through different occupations of science, business, entertainment, farmers, professionals who had contributed and founded businesses in the life of Henrico County. So we have now hanging in the Eastern Recreation Center 24 posters, some of which were done during the 400-year legacy of the African American Subcommittee with the history of celebration of Henrico County. But 12 of them were done through the committee that I was on, the African American Initiative, that are still hanging there. And we learned as we went, because there were some things we didn't know. People at Eastern Henrico County that had made wonderful contributions to the post-enslavement era and to the history and the founding of so many of our businesses and professionals in the Henrico County. So that's how I came along and got started, in that. And I'm looking forward to and gathering information to do my second book, which may be a little easier now that I've done one, than the first book. And we continue to speak and to expose persons and to educate them with the marker that we did on Quakerson Road. I formed a committee in 2013 from the Westwood Baptist Church, and Quakerson rhymes with Markerson. It is not Queakerson, it is Quakerson. It rhymes with Markerson. It's doing that first. It rhymes with Markerson. So you go into Quakerson Baptist Church, you will not hear this Quee thing. All right? That's what somebody else has started. But when we walked, my grandparents walked to Quakerson Baptist Church from Ziontown, from the back neighborhood. We walked. And
what does that mean? Is that an Indian name?
It is an Indian term that means holy place, blessed place of worship. Okay. And so we were able to discover that when we did when I wrote the narrative for the history of Quakerson Baptist Church last year. They turned 150 years old. So the committee asked me to come forth. They said, you know more about the history than we do, and rewrite the history for the 150th church anniversary. But before then, I founded that Quakerson Westwood Pride Memorial Cemetery Committee. And so we researched and we did and presented the application to do a marker for the Quakerson Westwood Baptist Cemetery, which is a historical cemetery because it was founded in 1929, in 1918, and people are still being buried there, such as one famous Tommy Edwards, who was the famous singer. So we wanted a marker there to stand, to note the fact that there were so many African Americans buried right there, and people didn't know about the cemetery. They kept telling me it was abandoned. I said, no, it's not abandoned. People are being buried there, and they're still being, buried there. And so that's a part of my journey. And as Elvatrice said, we continue to move toward that realm of exposing and being ongoing and establishing facts and exposing them and sharing them with a larger community. Thank you.
Do you remember the question?
That's okay. I'm gonna speak from what comes to my heart, and I've heard so many great things. I just want to relate the great heritage that I've gotten. There's so many things I can say. I'm just going to take them as they come. I'm the third Elizabeth. There was Elizabeth Bell Jones, that was the Cherokee Irish descent, who was an orphan. And my mother was Dr. Elizabeth Johnson, Jones Johnson. And my grandmother, during that time, with the Episcopal Church, and they were treated like a royal family when they first came. My grandfather had 7 sons, and he named them all, and he started, George Foreman wasn't the first one. He named them all John. John Herbert, John Davis, John Randolph, and it just kept going on. And my mother was a Mary Elizabeth, but she dropped the Mary. And but anyhow, they were well thought of in the Episcopal Diocese at the very beginning. It was like they were the family until my grandfather decided he was going to be a civil rights activist back then. And but my grandmother was a member of, I think she was a good friend of Maggie Walker back during that time, and the Women's Negro League, the organization, Business and Professional Women. But I do remember her telling the story that she got to know Eleanor Roosevelt. And she and Eleanor Roosevelt, I don't know when, but that she would take one of my uncles to the White House and they would have tea. Never could see anything documented about it, but I found a letter from Eleanor Roosevelt in the archives of my grandmother that she really did know Eleanor Roosevelt. And she had written letters to Eunice Shriver, letters from the Kennedy family. And I kept saying, this lady really did do some things, but I didn't know she founded an organization called the Tomorrow's World Foundation way back when. And so a lot of that, she was doing a lot of things, and Eleanor Roosevelt made it possible for her to have one of the first camps in the area of Washington, D.C., in that area. So I was a little girl going to this camp, and all these kids would come around. She was trying to help the less fortunate. And I just remember that. And going on into my childhood and moving, like I say, then to Lawrenceville. And I remember my mother was always one striving for education, and she she was the type that would say, Ford, my father, Ford, I'm going to go on to Boston, and you take care of the kids. And I remember that. And she went and got her master's degree from Boston University. She came on back home and did some things at Virginia Union and some other universities. But then she decided, Ford, we lived in Richmond there on Davis Avenue. My mother decided that, I had gotten married to Reverend Richard Rice from Sandusky, Ohio. And I want you to know that Janet Parks introduced me to my husband. She said, Betty, come on and go to the social. She said, I said, but I'm engaged. I was engaged, by the way. Didn't want to be engaged, but back then the guy said he wasn't going to lose me. And so he put a ring on my finger, and my father was not happy about it at all. So this was before, that's when he was going to Howard. And so, anyhow, Janet said, let's go to the store. You're just going to have hot chocolate and enjoy yourselves. And so she said, he'll come and pick you up. And I said, okay. Just a church social with hot chocolate and that kind of thing. And so the doorbell rang. I'd seen this guy earlier that day at Virginia Union. He walked down the hall, and I said, how are you, Richard? He said, how did you know my name? And I said, well, I saw the envelope in your pocket. And he smiled at me, and I smiled at him. And I said to myself, he's a pretty good-looking guy.
And he was.
Later, it looked like Aaron Belafonte, only not as tall. But anyhow, that next day, that night, who rings the doorbell but this same Richard, the blind date. And my father loved him right away. He didn't like the other guy. And we went on the date, and during that time, I think it must have been a divine thing, because on the first date, he fell in love with me, and he told me that, I believe he proposed to me on the first date. He said, I want you to mother my sons. Well, there's one son right there. And the other son's in San Antonio, Texas. I had 2 boys. And so we were married for 51 years. So that just kind of goes to show you how that story is all. So he was quite a fellow. But during that time, my mother, there she is wanting to get that education. She said, Lord, you take care of the kids. I've seen Betty get married. She wanted me to get married in this big house and what have you. So she had a way of making things happen. So I got married there through the cave, through the winding staircase. She wanted to do a Gone with the Wind thing. So that happened. She decided to go on to, she said, I'm going to University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And she went to University of Virginia, and boy, she caught it with those professors and the mentality of the University of Virginia at that time. But she did manage to get a doctorate from the University of Virginia, and during that time, shortly thereafter, she became the first dean of the University of Virginia for submission of admissions and recruitment. So she made her mark in terms of being the first dean of admissions. And I was real proud of her for that, and she came up with some wonderful things. And I think about this whole thing. You're going to read my book. I promise you, you're going to read my book this year. I'm going to get it out. But my father was so unique. He was the secretary of the NAACP here in Richmond-area. He loved his job, did it. And when we were in Lawrenceville, I'll never forget, he was quite an entrepreneur. He had his dental office upstairs. He decided he would open a Doc's Variety and record store downstairs. And I became the person that I was in charge of the store, and they had, the vinyl records were out there. And my father was able to become he brought Fats Domino to Lawrenceville, Virginia, and Little Richard. When the warehouse season was over, he would clear the warehouse, and somehow I made the hamburgers and hot dogs, sent them to the warehouse. My mother took up the tickets, and Fats Domino was in town. So that happened during then. So those rich things. And coming into Richmond, and during of course the union thing was so important because of that background. And I remember 1960, February 22nd, George Washington's birthday. Never forget it. There were about 200 of us on campus that day, and we weren't going to class. And I left my home with the anticipation of going to class, but instead, we had already been taught by Martin Luther King about nonviolence and what to do. So we picked up our placards that day on campus, and I was planning to go to class, but before I knew it, I, along with, I guess, 200 others, walked down to Tallheimer, and we got arrested. And going in, 34 of us went into the store, sat at the lunchroom counter, and we got arrested, and were sent to jail. And we wondered, how are we going to get out of jail? So we got out of jail because of the gifts of strangers, professors, teachers, the NAACP lawyers, and I don't know how they did it, but 34 were let out of jail within hours after getting there. You see the pictures there in the front as you come in. It was quite a day because I was really worried about, you know, I told my mother I was going to school now, and here I am, a jailbird, coming out of jail. But when I got out of jail, I realized that for blocks and blocks, people were lining the sidewalks, and they were just praising us for what we did that day. And I didn't realize the impact of what had happened until years later, that we really made a difference. Something happened in Richmond that week. And so we did stand up for our rights. And
Well, did Tallheimers integrate after your sitting?
not immediately, but shortly thereafter. But the thing about it is Virginia Union did not acknowledge what we did. And it was 2004. Now keep in mind, we got arrested in 1960. 2004, I was a teacher there in Washington, D.C., in those schools, Maryland schools. And I came home from school one day and something just hit me. You know, the union never said thank you. Union never said what you did was really something. And so it was like God said, well, no one's done it, so you got to do it. So I got together a march. I called Dr. Hilton from Union, said I was Elizabeth Rice. I'd been arrested back in 1960, and could you help me with a commemoration march? And sure enough, he was looking for me, wondering where I'd gone, and I got the police and everybody to get together. And believe it or not, Janet was there that day. We got a march together and marched from Lombardy to Tallheimers before it got torn down. And we had our little march. Henry March was there, and the mayor giving me a proclamation. And so we made it happen. But it was Elizabeth Tallheimer Smart, the daughter of Mr. Tallheimer, who was there. And she said that, listen, you need to be recognized. You all don't. You hear about the Greensboro 4, but you never hear about the Richmond 34. So she said, you're gonna have a celebration for your 50th anniversary. And sure enough, the city of Richmond came together and we had a great celebration. And John Legend for our entertainment. A lot of notable people came to town. But that was just, it let me realize that there's still much to do. And I today am still, I go around to elementary schools, high schools, churches, and I let them know that, hey, I was here in 1960 and got arrested. And this is why I stood up for this, that, and the other. And I said, what are you doing? What can you do? And so I guess I since have founded the Be Part of the Solution Foundation, BPOS, which is a nonprofit. And I, like Bonnie, was trying to get funds to do things, but the kids are just amazed that this happened and that I'm here. You actually were there? You actually knew Martin Luther King? Well, then they said, well, then you must be. And then one little kid said to me once, you look pretty good for your age. So those are the kinds of things that happen. But anyhow, there's so much I could say. I guess I was one of the first teachers to integrate Petersburg High School. And I met with such racism during then, but I've gone through all of this. We've all gone through our stories to just know it's made us a better person, and to let all of you know the best is yet to come. My book, other books, other celebrations like this. And so there's much more. Don't get me started talking. All of us can talk, as I can see. We all can talk. So let me just say, I'm just excited about today and all the things that have happened. And just God bless all of you for coming.
How did you start writing? I mean, you just don't sit down and say, I'm going to write a book. You have to start writing something. How did you even know you had a talent to write? Because writing is not easy. As one journalist said, you just sit down and open up a vein. Because if you have something to say and you want to say it in a really special way, you have to think about it. How are your words falling onto the page? How do you have that talent? Did you wanted to be a musician? You wanted music? What did you grow up in? Did you say I want to be a writer someday? Did you say I want to be a writer someday? So how did you just sit down and start? Did you sit down and start writing? Briefly tell me about it.
Briefly, in order to tell the histories, you will have to put pen to paper. And when you do, first of all, it's got to be undergirded with sound, research and scholarship. But after that, you know that you can pay copy editors to clean it up. And you put down what you get, and you go from there. And like anything else, it comes with experience. Again, being an educator undergirds all that we do. I failed to mention that I started out as an educator, joining the faculty at Hampton University when I was 24 years old. But I saw how passionate my parents were about teaching. They were master teachers, Ernest Parker at Virginia Randolph, and my mom taught first grade as a career first grader. And when you see the passion like that, you want to choose something. I guess I'm saying something a little bit ahead of, what our advice would be to others. Find what you're passionate about, listen for that inner voice, for that calling, and follow it. Being an educator can undergird anything that you do, but it only highlights what you do. So it's, you let God take care of the rest, put pen to paper, and you use copy editors from there.
Okay.
Being a teacher, you get accustomed to writing lesson plans. I had principals that wanted them on the desk. Some wanted them on the board every week. I had one principal that loved bulletin boards. So he wanted the bulletin board changed every month. I said, really? So I found a teacher that loved to do bulletin boards, and I said, here are all these music, terms. Here are all the music pictures, symbols, and everything. You just take it and go for it. So she helped me put bulletin boards up. But in order to write lesson plans, in order to teach, I taught middle and high school. Elementary school was not my passion. I probably been in jail by now. But middle and high school I loved because I didn't want to have to micromanage the children. With the little bitty ones, you have to tell Jane and John to sit here, take out your pencil paper. But for middle and high school, and even now, I teach part-time at Virginia Union. I teach piano keyboard. So you give the children their lessons, the young people their lessons, and instruct them in what it is you want them to do, and then they do it. So what I learned was, in order to write, you have to have a plan in your head. And for me, once I decided to write the book, and what I wanted it to be composed of, and I was encouraged, as I said earlier, from my husband and then my children to write the book, I just formulated a plan, how I wanted to do it. And then, as Ms. Elvatrice Belsches has said, and then I said, all right, Lord, how am I going to do this? And but I put pen to paper. I wrote, as I went through the county, of the histories, the opening statements of each chapter for the book. I formulated just what I wanted to do historically, to write that which was relevant and also that which was truthful, because you have to be truthful when you do your research for the dates and for persons involved, because someone will come along and pick it loose if it's not what it's supposed to be. So I was able to do that, to write, put the pen to paper. to make it relevant. And my mom was the first in her family to go to Virginia State Normal School for a year. But there were 9 children, so she only stayed a year. Parents could afford to send her another year. But my dad only had a 10th grade education. But he always wanted, she and my father and my mom wanted better for us. They wanted us to go to school. They felt education was the answer to bettering yourself and to make a contribution to the community. So my dad was on the 10th grade, but he formed a business in 1940, and he hauled, they say trash, but now they call it refuge.
He's an environmental engineer.
That's right. Which you probably ask now, what is that? But for 50 years, he had his own business right there on Ridge Road, and that's how he and my mom, who worked for Lester Banks in the NAACP office on 2nd Street for years, and she formed a Girl Scout troop. So they were always community activists. I just didn't know it, at that time. So you write and you learn to write. That was important because when you inform the public, you want to give them what is factual and correct, but you also want to make a positive contribution. So I learned how to write as I was doing the book from being a teacher in the Henrico Public Schools. And as Ms. Belsches said, once you write it and you send it all to them, then they say, well, keep this, take that out. And they were able to edit and advise us on how to keep what was
Sure, that's right. Can you briefly tell us?
You asked at the beginning, did you always want to be a writer?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a nightclub singer. I wanted to be another Nancy Wilson.
Oh, okay.
And I had a voice then, my son has a voice. But I do remember I was given a job by the Afro-American newspaper, and this was after I, gone to Union. And I remember my assignment was, we want you to go to interview this young upstarting person who was making a name in tennis. And we want you to go and interview him. And I was given the opportunity to do the first interview for Arthur Ashe. And he doesn't remember that. Of course, when I mentioned it to him, I met him one day at the tennis courts when I was happened to be coming down the street. And he said, "You never interviewed me." I said, "Yes, I did." And so we had words that day in front of the tennis court. But that I said, well, I wrote that and they enjoyed it. It was the byline was by Betty Johnson. And later on, I would write comments and write articles, and people said, "You have a gift, why don't you perfect it? Do more with it." And it really, I didn't really think about writing a book so much. I did those lesson plans. Those lesson plans had to be on somebody's desk Monday morning for the whole week. So you had to do a lot of writing to make it make sense. But I worked for my brother, and I don't want to leave you today without letting you know that my brother, 4T Johnson Jr., had a case that went from Richmond to the Supreme Court when he integrated the courtrooms of the United States. He got arrested for not having the tags on his car properly placed, and they hauled him into court. And he went to the courtroom and sat down, and before long, the judge said, "Colored boy, you're sitting on the wrong side of the court. Come over here where the black folks are." And he got up reluctantly, and he stood in front of the judge's bench. He refused to sit down. He said, "If you don't sit down, we're going to hold you in contempt of court." And so he was held in contempt of court, and he told the judge, there were no seats over here. There were plenty of seats over there. He said, "Well, that's not the way we do it here." So they threw him into court, threw him into jail, and when he was getting ready to go to be put in jail, who saw him but Doug Wilder, who was my family's lawyer at the time, and he told my father, your son just got arrested. They've thrown him into jail. And he found out what that was, and that became the case, Johnson versus the state of Virginia. And went all the way to the Supreme Court. And Ford was in Ghana as a Peace Corps volunteer when they won the case, Johnson versus the state of Virginia. And later on, he went to Harvard Law School, and the class was teaching that day, believe it or not, that case. And the teacher kept saying, and this young boy was driving his father's red car. I said, no, sir, it wasn't red, it was a green car. And they said, and he kept on interrupting, and the professor said, well, how do you know so much about this, Mr. Johnson? He said, because I am the Johnson. So I had to, that makes me want to write. I'm writing his story and my story, and it's all gone. So that's what's happening.